In the last lecture module, we considered the 2-case strategy, the general strategy adopted by nomic covariation to try and diffuse the difficulties raised by the disjunction problem. I noted that all the various versions of nomic covariation involve adapting one or another different approach to the 2-case strategy. We ended the last lecture module by considering the first of those adaptations, the appeal to idealization. We'll begin this module by looking at the next of those adaptations, the appeal to learning periods. Fred Dredske suggests that a cognizer can develop a perfect causal connection between the mental state and the object, property, event, or relation that state will come to represent with the help of an instructor who provides examples and corrections during a learning period. Once that learning period ends, then the cognizer goes from a content imbuing situation to a content utilizing situation. At that point, the cognizer's state has a fixed content, and tokenings of the state in cases where the object, property, event, or relation is not present can count as misrepresentations. Jerry Fodor argued against a principal distinction between learning and non-learning periods, suggesting that there is no way to in principle distinguish between these two kinds of cases. If Dredske, Fodor suggests, cannot offer a principal ground for distinguishing between learning and non-learning periods, then Dredske has no basis upon which to call some tokenings of a state content imbuing and other tokenings of the state representing or misrepresenting in the content utilization cases. Even if one can rigorously specify a learning period, learning during this period seems to provide no principal distinction between univocal and disjunctive causal connections. Any mistakes that occur after the learning period appear to be cases where the actual representational content cultivated during the learning period was in fact the disjunctive content now exhibited during the utilization period. The next variation on the 2-case strategy involves teleological accounts. Advocates of the teleological solution to the disjunction problem suggest that evolutionary selectional history determines content. For example, a frog captures and eats any ambient moving dot in its visual field. This allows frogs to survive in environments that are rich in flies, which then are the typical ambient moving dots. As a result of the selectional content of flies for those ambient moving dots, hungry frogs misrepresent and eat ball bearings when rolled in front of them should one remove frogs from their natural environment. Fodor criticizes teleological accounts, claiming that evolution does not select with sufficient precision to account for typical, univocal, and determinate content. Likewise, most artifacts in the human environment were not present during a significant portion of human evolutionary history, rendering their representation inexplicable by appeals to teleology alone. Finally, there's a difficulty with explanatory order. If a mental state in a frog represents flies because of its selectional history, one must ask, why was it selected? The answer appears to be that state represented flies. That is, because the frog represented flies when it saw black ambient dots, it ate those flies. Because it ate those flies, it was selected and hence continued to propagate its genome. However, since content is only explicable after evolutionary selection, then there can't be content before evolutionary selection to drive evolutionary selection. Jerry Fodor introduced and argues for the final iteration or version of the 2-case strategy, that of asymmetric dependence. The rationale for asymmetric dependence, according to Fodor, is that misrepresentation is asymmetrically dependent upon correct representations. In other words, cognizers can only misrepresent something because they are capable of representing. Error proves parasitic upon veridicality. The most salient difficulty for asymmetric dependence lies in the fact that the brain recognizes higher-level concepts through the detection of features. As a consequence, it appears that there is no asymmetric dependence between cases. Or worse, it goes the wrong way, from fate to representation. That is, representing an object as something is asymmetrically dependent upon the fact that we can misrepresent it as something else. Let's end this module by considering one final problem for nomic covariation theories. theories. Up to this point, we've been assuming that it's unproblematic and straightforward to determine which link in a causal chain from some history of the world to a current mental state is the determinate link that fixes content according to gnomic covariation. However, when we start to work our way back through the causal chain, there seem to be several highly reliable covariations along that chain between the world and any given mental state. For example, the Big Bang and the back of your retina are as reliably correlated with the tokening of a mental state in your central nervous system as any other point on that causal chain. As a result, gnomic covariationists often think about the problem of depth, the problem of determining when and why it is that only the distal environment and the causes therein are candidates for content and not, for example, the firing patterns at the back of your eye or the Big Bang or your own birth. In the next lecture module, we'll shift focus from gnomic covariation theories to functional role semantics.